We've been talking about stewardship, about giving, about serving for the entire month, and we are going to continue today. And I'm going to use the story of Peter walking on water. And as I was getting ready for this, my wife made it a point to mention to me that I've already used this story on a Sunday morning and that I shouldn't. And me being listening as well as I do, I said I'm going to do it anyway. And so I feel like the pressure's on, and I should have dress it up a little bit more for us this morning. So, back in December, my family and I went to the Ark Encounter in Kentucky. Awesome experience. If you have an opportunity to go do it. And right up the road is the Creation Museum. So we went to that. And in the Creation Museum, they have this little theater video presentation that is, they call it a 4D experience. And I know that there are some theaters that have the 4D theaters. Has anybody ever been to a 4D theater? Okay, let me sum it up for you really quick if you haven't been. You pay a lot of extra money to get sprayed in the water with face and air while you watch the movie. So it blows the popcorn out of your hand and then gets it wet, and that's what it is. And so while we're at the Creation Museum watching this thing about creation, we're getting sprayed in the face by water and air. It's really a fun experience. It in no way made me feel like I was actually there at creation. I was just wet and windblown. But I figured since we're doing it, we might as well do it anyway. So we're going to have a 4D sermon this morning on Peter walking on water. So I'm going to have a few people come up and help me. And so Brennan's already volunteered. I had to secure him ahead of time. Brennan's going to volunteer. He's going to be Peter this morning. So Brennan, you can come on up. So if you don't know the story, the story happens on the Sea of Galilee in a boat. So this is your boat. So feel free to get in the boat. I make no promises. Have a seat in the boat. You have some oars there for you to row with. There's two. You can put them together like Darth Maul's lightsaber, or you can row individually. It's however you want to what. You've got to get across the lake, so just row at your own. Looks good. All right. Now, this wouldn't be a 4D experience without some other things. So one thing that happened in this experience is that the other disciples were there as well. So I'm going to need one of my students to volunteer to be one of the disciples in the boat. All right, Journey, come on up. No. All right, Journey, you don't realize this, but you didn't volunteer for what you told me you wanted to volunteer for. Are you going to go with this one or no? All right, Journey's going to be, so we have wind, right? We have wind. So we need to have wind in this experience because it plays an important role. So we have wind. Go ahead and give it a try. I think it'd be better if it was in his face. Because that's the 4D experience that you get at the theater. It's right in your face. There we go. All right. So, Journey, whenever we hear about wind or waves in the story, you need to blow wind at Peter. All right? You got it? All right. I need to go over here. You guys keep changing sides on me. All right. Next we have the wave or the water. So I didn't even ask for a volunteer yet. Clearly, people are excited to do things to Brennan. Especially our students. All right, Mercy's going to come up. She's going to be the water. Mercy. I have a worry. And let me tell you, don't let her name fool you. She was going to show no mercy. All right. So we need water in this case. So go ahead and test that out. All right. So whenever... You're going to be soaked by the time we're done with this because I know my daughter. Whenever you hear winds or waves, then go ahead and feel free to mist Brennan with the wind. Two more things that we need is obviously everything in the Bible is about Jesus. So we need somebody to be Jesus. All right, Kellen, you can come up and be Jesus. But Jesus isn't quite in the story yet, so you need to go off on the mountain and pray. And when Jesus comes walking, you got to come walking. He missed that cue in the first service, so I had to make sure he knew that. And then when Jesus talks, you have to talk, right? Okay. And then I need one more. I need a student to be a disciple in the boat. This is a crucial role. I need a volunteer. Ooh, I like it when my students don't volunteer because then I get to pick people. Oh, do I get a volunteer? All right, come on up. I can't see who's over there. Oh, Charlotte. Charlotte, I have one question before you get up here. Can you be loud? Okay. Wow. Her parents were like, absolutely. All right. Your job is that when the story talks about there being trouble, you've got to be loud. Well, this is so hard, or whatever you want to say there. And then when the disciples scream because they're scared, you've got to scream as loud as you can. Not near me, though. Stand over there. Stand up. Just right there. Not in my ear. Okay. All right. Are we ready? Is everybody ready? Okay. We're going to read through this. Matthew chapter 14, verse 22. And before we get started, we got to get back to why we're in this situation. So if you don't know the backstory of this, the backstory to the guys being in the boat and being on the water and Jesus walking on the water is that they had been ministering to the 5,000 men that they fed with some fish and some bread. So we're just coming off of that. Jesus had been preaching all day, and the disciples come up to Jesus and said, hey, look, we've been here all day. People are getting hangry, and we need to send them home before we have a problem. And Jesus is like, well, why don't you feed them? And they're like, I didn't sign up for that. So they look around, they scrounge up some fish and some bread. Jesus multiplies them. The disciples feed everybody from what Jesus multiplies, and everybody gets to eat. There's a whole bunch left over, so you got to have leftover Lunchables for the next week. Immediately after that is done, Jesus looks at his disciples and says, get in the boat and go across the lake. The crazy thing about that, they literally had just gotten in the boat and gone across the lake to where they're at. And Jesus says, get in the boat, go back across the lake. Anybody ever feel like you go in circles in life? That's all right. Jesus sends people in circles. So Jesus said, get back in the boat, go back across the lake. And so they get in the boat and they're in the middle of the lake. And we'll jump into the story there. Verse 22 says, immediately after this, right after they got done serving the fish and the bread, Jesus insisted that his disciples get back into the boat and cross to the other side of the lake while he sent the people home. So verse 23, after sending them home, so after Jesus sent the crowd away, he went up into the hills by himself to pray. Night fell while he was there alone. Are you praying, Jesus? Okay. Just checking. So when the guys got in the boat, when the disciples got in the boat, it was not yet dark. So in the boat, on the lake, a few of these guys are like natives of the boat. They've been fishermen. They know their way around boats. They've been in the boat. Jump ahead. Verse 24. Are you still rowing, Peter?
Yeah, we should have a sailboat.
Should have a sailboat. Nope. Now you made me lose my place. Verse 24. Meanwhile, the disciples were in trouble far away from land. Good job. Now, from what I read in preparing for this is that the stretch where they were trying to cross was about 6 miles. They should have been, close enough that they could see land. But where the Sea of Galilee is at and where it is at elevation-wise, a lot of moisture comes in and causes a lot of fog, and it's in the middle of the night, and so it's really hard for them to see. So meanwhile, the disciples were in trouble far away from land, for a strong wind had risen, and they were fighting.
Oh, come on. That's not a strong wind.
Oh, we got to back up for that one. Meanwhile, are we ready? Okay. Water, are you ready? Yes. Okay. Meanwhile, the disciples were in trouble far away from land, for a strong wind had risen, and they were fighting heavy waves. About 3 o'clock in the morning. So I don't know what time it gets dark over there, what time of year it was. But for several hours, these guys have been in this boat, rowing and getting nowhere. It should have taken them about 2 hours. It is now taken, if they got in the boat at 6 hours, they've been in this boat rowing against the waves and the wind and going nowhere. About 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came toward them, walking on the water. It's always fun doing things with students. Verse 26, when the disciples saw him walking on the water, they were terrified. In their fear, they cried out, "It's a ghost."
It's a ghost!
Verse 27, but Jesus spoke to them at once and said, "Don't be afraid. Take courage. I am here."
Don't be afraid. Take courage. I am here.
It's confident, Jesus. Verse 28, then Peter called to him, "Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come to you walking on the water." Yes, Peter, that's you. Water. All right. Verse 29, Jesus said, "Yes, come." All right. So Peter went over the side of the boat and walked on the water. Hold on, Peter's taking a while to get out of the boat. So Peter went over the side of the boat and walked on the water towards Jesus. But when he saw the strong wind and the waves, he was terrified and began to sink. "Save me, Lord," he shouted.
Save me, Lord.
And Jesus immediately reached out and grabbed him. "You have so little faith," Jesus said. "Why do you doubt me?" And when they climbed back into the boat, the wind stopped, and then the disciples worshiped him, saying, "You really are the Son of God."
You really are the Son of God.
Awesome. All right, let's give it up for these guys. You guys can have a seat. Thank you. So, you may be wondering what the story of Peter and Jesus walking on the water has to do with serving and stewardship, giving. And what it has to do is, as a student pastor, when I encounter people that either I would like to serve in student ministry, or I just approach and say, "Hey, would you be interested in serving in student ministry?" There's usually one response that I get very rapidly and very succinctly, and that is no. And I get it. Like, students are a little scary, right? If you don't think so, I invite you to come be a part of summer camp with us. That will change your perspective. But the truth is, stepping out into the things that God is calling us to do, whether it's with our money, with our time, with our talents, or maybe God's just really trying to nudge us out of our comfort zone, it's really difficult to step into that. And so this morning, I want to spend a little time talking more about the reasons why we don't step out of the boats and how we can overcome those things than necessarily talking about the opportunities that we have. And at the end, I'm going to invite you to consider some opportunities that we have. But for right now, we're going to look at some things that may keep us from stepping into what God is calling us to. And so, as we looked at today, there were several things going on in the story, several things that played a part, and one of those things was the boat. And in life, this boat can represent a place of safety for us. I grew up in Central Illinois, spent a little bit of time up in the Chicago area, and there's a large body of water up there called Lake Michigan. Now, if you were to get out in the middle of Lake Michigan, it's a little ways out there, and land is not close, and it's big enough that it has its own weather patterns. It sinks ships. It's pretty crazy out there. Can you imagine being out there in the middle of that water by yourself with no boat? You will be looking for something to get yourself into that will be a safer situation than the one that you're currently in. For many of us, when God is calling us to get out of our comfort zone and step into what He is leading us to, we want to run back to what feels safe. The boat, I imagine for the disciples, as crazy it was, probably was a safer place than being out on the water. Like I said, many of these guys were fishermen. They had been on the water. They kind of knew what to expect. And so being in the boat let them be able to be safe, to be comfortable. Even though the waves were going on outside, it was safer in the boat. The problem is with being in the boat, that's not where God was doing something. Jesus was walking on the water, and Peter said, "Hey, can I come out there?" And Jesus said, "Yes, come." There was an invitation from God to step out of the safe place and step into what God was doing in that moment. If Peter had not stepped out and stepped off the side of that boat, he wouldn't have gotten to experience the miracle of walking on water. So many times we spend our relationship with God asking Him, "God, will you do something? God, I want to see a miracle. God, I want to be a part of what you're doing." And then when He invites us to step off, we stay in the boat. So the way that we can overcome the need to feel safe when God is calling us into new water, when God is calling us into a new experience, when God is calling us to step into something that is not inside our comfort zone, is to just jump in. When I was a little guy, I don't know, 5 or under, I was small enough, I don't remember this at all. I had a cousin, she was, I think she was a teenager at the time, but we were at the pool. She was babysitting me that day. We were at the pool, and for a long period of time, we were kind of doing this thing where she was in the water, and I would jump off the side, and she would catch me. She'd put me back up, jump off the side, repeat over and over again. Well, then it came time for break time. I don't even know if they still do break time at pools, but it came time for break time. So every hour there was 15 minutes where everybody had to get out of the pool, and then those above a certain age could still swim. So break time comes, lifeguards blow the whistle. We get out, and Mary, my cousin, sits me on a chair, says, "Hey, stay right here. Don't go anywhere. I'm going to go swim for a second, and then we'll get back in and do this again." So she proceeds to walk around to the other side of the pool from where we had been. While she was doing that, I decided it's go time. I went up to the edge and jumped in. She panicked, dove from the other end of the pool, swam all the way down, picked me up, and I said, "Where'd you go?" Sometimes we are reluctant to jump in because we aren't sure that God is going to be there to catch us if we fall. Stepping out into what God is calling us to often is uncertain because He doesn't give us the whole details up front. Like if God laid everything out, most of us would probably be willing to jump. Like if we knew what we were going to have to encounter, if we knew what we were going to have to do, we could probably be ready for it. Mentally we could get ready for that and we could just go. But God, only gives us what we need to know to take the step that he's asking us to take. Peter asked, "Can I walk on the water?" And Jesus said, "Come." He'd already shown Peter that it was possible. To experience the life that God has for us, we have to be willing to get out of what is safe and step into the adventure that he's calling us into. So we've got the boats, and then we've got the wind. And in this situation, this wind was something that was keeping the disciples from getting to where they were supposed to be going. Jesus said, "Get in the boat, go to the other side." And they've been struggling, trying to get to where God has been leading them, but it's been hard. And sometimes when we are following God, things aren't easy. God tells you to be generous with your finances, and all of a sudden, you've got all these unexpected bills when you just gave a bunch of money to something. Or God is asking you to step out and pray for somebody. And in your mind, you struggle to pray on your own, let alone pray with somebody. Or maybe life situations just aren't what you expected, and things are hard. Or maybe God's asking you to give up some time to serve here at the church or serve somewhere else, or bless somebody, and things just aren't lining up perfectly. And your conversation with God ends up being, "God, if I could just free up my schedule here, or God, if you would just kick up our finances a little bit here, then we could jump into this." But if we were to read any account in the Bible of people following God, it often was difficult at moments in their pursuit. I can imagine that when Jesus called these guys to follow him, at first everybody seemed excited. It was kind of a big deal to be called by a rabbi to come and follow him, to learn from him, to have him be your mentor. But Jesus didn't say, "Look, you're going to have to be in the boat rowing for 6 hours in the middle of the night." He kind of left that detail out. Things are difficult, and things will try to keep you from where God is asking you to step off and to step in. And the way you overcome that is to just keep going. Anybody even have kids that you grew up listening or watching Finding Nemo? Just keep swimming, right? Just keep swimming. Sometimes in life, we just got to keep going. No matter what circumstances say, no matter how hard things are. And listen, I know some of you have hard things in life, like things that I can't even understand, or things that I haven't even had to go through. So I'm not trying to fluff over things and say, "Oh, it's just, just deal with it." What I'm saying is that life is hard. Just keep going. Because you have the example of Jesus in the garden when he's looking forward to the cross. And in a moment that I don't think was fear or doubt, but he asked God, if there's another way for redemption to happen, can we go that way? And I think he was simply looking at everything he was going to have to endure and wondering if he could physically make it. But then he remembered who the one was that was getting him through. And he says, "God, not my will, but your will be done." Whatever the hard things you are facing in life, the one who is calling you out of the boat is the one that will get you through. And so we don't need to stay in the boat because of safety. We don't need to be afraid of the hard things in life. We don't have to worry about the wind. But we also had the people in the boat that were a little freaked out. right? If we're honest, if we were be out in the middle of a body of water, rowing for 6 hours, there's winds, there's waves, and from my research, I've seen that the waves could possibly get up to about 20 feet high in the Sea of Galilee. The winds drive that much in the shape of the land and everything. Potential, there's been waves as high as 20 feet there. Several years back, my family and I took a cruise, a Disney cruise out through the Gulf. Great weather going out. I forget where we went, Cozumel or something like that. And we get on the boat. We're out there on the island. Big storm comes through, rains. We get on the boat. We're soaked. And we head back out to come back to Texas. In the midst of that, we got a lot of wind and 18-foot swells for the entire night. And the entire night, you could feel that boat climb, slam into the water, and do it over and over again. That was a big ocean liner. I can't imagine what that would be like in a little bitty fishing boat. If it were me, I would be a little bit panicked, if I'm just going to say, right? Not only that, it's dark, it's windy, there's waves, you've been struggling for 6 hours, you're exhausted, but some guy comes walking on the water, something that doesn't normally happen. I don't know if any of you have seen somebody walk on water. I have not. But they're a little freaked out. And I don't know if some of them were thinking, well, okay, this is the end. But they're afraid of what's going to happen. Sometimes the reason we don't step into what God is calling us to is because we're afraid of what's going to happen. Sometimes the reason why we don't give is because we're afraid that we're not going to have enough. Sometimes the reason why we don't serve in things like kids or students is because we're afraid that we are not prepared enough. People always jump to like the worst case scenario when I ask them, hey, come serve with students. They're like, what if a kid asks me about suicide? It's like, oh, let's just get in and hang out with them for a little bit and we'll get across that bridge when we get there. But that's what we do. We come up in our mind with all these what ifs. God, what if this happens when I follow you? And we talk ourselves into being scared of the thing that God is leading us to and promising us to get through, as we'll see next. And the way to combat our fear, the thing that is holding us back, that what if in our mind of what if this thing doesn't work out for us, is to be courageous. And I told this story earlier. I think my son bailed on this because he probably didn't want to hear it again. When Kellen, our oldest son, second oldest after Mercy, he was going into first grade. We had moved to Illinois. We'd been there for about a year. And the first year we got up there, we were kind of late getting settled in the house, and so Jenna homeschooled for the first year. We got to the next year, and we decided to put our kids in public school. And so if you knew Kellen at that age, he was very anxious about anything that was new and unfamiliar to him. So in our wisdom, we decided to go stick him in a new school around people that he didn't know, because most of the people we did life with lived in a different town because we lived in a different town than we worked at. And so he was going into a brand new school, brand new location, brand new people, and he was super anxious. Like the nights leading up, you could just see the anxiety grow in him. And so we took him to school the first day, went out, they got to go play on the playground until it was time to go in. And so he found some guys that were kicking soccer balls around, so he went and played soccer with them. And then it was time for them to get called in and get in line for school. So while he had a momentary relief of this anxiety, he gets in line and you could just see all that come over him again. The apprehension in his face. He was fidgeting. He was nervous. And literally, as they are about to walk in, I watched my son just go and take a step. And I have seen him repeatedly do that in his life. in the midst of fear of the unknown, in the midst of fear of what was going to come next, he had the courage to step off and step into the next thing. Listen, there might be plenty of reasons why you're afraid to step into what God is calling you to. Maybe things haven't worked out in the past. There have been a number of times where things haven't worked out in ministry for us, in student ministry, from student that I had mentored, spent a lot of time with, and he came to me with something, and I felt like I was giving him some godly wisdom to be cautious, and he literally said to me, you don't know what you're talking about, and I'm not going to listen to what you have to say. That's the hard stuff about stepping into ministry and stepping into what God's calling you. You don't have any guarantee of how that's going to look on the other side of things. I sat in a meeting at a church with senior leadership and had them tell me you shouldn't be in student ministry. But I had to just go back to the one thing that I knew for certain, that God had called me to it. And I think my response to that was, I'm not doing it because I feel like I'm qualified. I'm doing it because God told me to do it. So the way that we overcome fear in our life when God is asking us to step out of the boat is to just be courageous and take a step. Just keep taking the next step that God is asking us to take. And that could be that God is asking you to step out and pray for somebody at work that you can see their life is struggling. Maybe their marriage is failing. Maybe their finances are failing. Maybe their job is about to fail. Maybe they're about to get fired, and maybe you know that. Maybe they've been talking about it. Or maybe they're just on a life course that is spiraling out of control. And God is saying, hey, just pray for them. Be courageous, take a step, and pray for them. Maybe God is asking you to give something uncomfortable. Whatever it is, have the courage to step out of the boat, even if the ground you're stepping on feels uncertain. Which brings us to the last thing, the water. I imagine when Peter was in that boat and he went to step out, I don't think he just jumped overboard. And the reason why I don't think that is because if we go back in there, before we get to the end where Peter is sinking, Peter's already starting off with some doubt before he steps into this thing. If we would go back and read, it says, when Jesus is walking to them on the water, they freak out, naturally. Verse 27, but Jesus spoke to them at once, don't be afraid. He said, take courage, I am here. And really, the way Jesus says that is the same way that God tells Moses, I am. Moses was afraid to step out into what God was calling him to lead the Israel people out of Egypt. And Moses had this whole list of things of like, God, I can't do this. You've got the wrong person. And God, he's like, who am I supposed to tell them is like sent me, because they're not just going to believe me. And God's like, I am. Like, that's enough. Just tell them I am. Jesus uses the same thing here. Don't be afraid, guys. It's me. And this is verbiage that Jesus had used in the past around the disciples. And so they would have recognized this as Jesus. Number one, who else would be walking on the water at 3 a.m. in the morning? But Jesus clearly identifies himself as the one that they've seen work miracles. But Peter's response is, Lord, if it's really you, like he's there, like, Jesus just got done saying, it's me. And Peter's like, well, if it's really you, And how many times do we do that with God? God is calling us to do something, and we're like, well, God, if it's really you, then if you're really asking me to give this crazy amount of money, then you're going to fill my bank up first, right? Or God, if you really want me to pray for this person, you're going to have them come to me. Or God, if you really want me to serve in the children's departments, well, God, that's not even on the table. So, but God, if you really want this, and we put our conditions on it. Peter sees Jesus. Jesus identified as himself, and then he responds, Lord, if it's really you, ask me to come. The thing I love about Jesus is he is faithful and patient with us in our stubbornness and in our fear and in our anxiety, in our reservation, in our need to be safe. Jesus is patient and he invites us to come. Peter said, if it's you, Lord, if it's really you, invite me to come. And Jesus says, simply come. And as he steps out of that boat, he steps onto water. I don't. Anybody around here like grow up in the early 80s? Oh, listen, you guys got to help me out here. I know that a lot of you in this room grew up in the 80s. Okay, there we go. You remember a thing called a waterbed? Do you remember as a kid getting up on those things and trying to stand up? Okay, multiply that by a lake with 18-foot waves, 20-foot waves, right? It's not going to be the easiest thing to stand up on that water, even if it was solid, right? So imagine Peter getting out of that boat being like, just trying with a toe. Okay, is that seems good. Okay, now maybe lean on that a little bit, and then he's getting the other foot out, still holding on to the boats. Meanwhile, Jesus is over there going like, dude, I just told you to come. Just get out the boat. And Peter gets out on this water that is uncertain and unstable. And is in a place that he has never been before in his life. Nobody other than Jesus at this point had walked on water. We have some instances where God cleared water out of the way and then people walked across on dry ground, but nobody to this point had walked on water that I know of, except Jesus. And Peter is walking on water. Now, it doesn't say that he took 2 steps. It doesn't say that he took 50 steps. We don't know how far Peter walked on the water. But at some point, he began to doubt what God had called him to, because where he was didn't feel certain. When we have the courage to step out and follow what God is calling us to, there are going to be times where it feels uncertain. Ask anybody who's been following God for a long time, when you're in something, there are plenty of times where it feels uncertain. Go on a mission trip. By the way, our students are going to be taking a mission trip in the fall. Little plug there. More details to come. Go on a mission trip. You got to raise funds. And there's usually deadlines for those funds, so like plane tickets being bought and that type of stuff. Jen and I we met at Christ for the Nations, and part of the thing that you have to do is go on a mission trip. And so both of us went on mission trips. And so there's always that time when it's coming up, and I don't know if it necessarily happened to me, but there's always somebody in the group that was like way off of getting funds in to make that trip. And they were uncertain on whether they were going to go or not. Example from my own life, I've been at Christ for Nation for 2 years, was getting ready to start their 3rd year of youth ministry. And when I had completed the spring semester before, the director of Youth for the Nations, which is their youth camp, had come and talked to me about having a position on staff with the camp that would scholarship me for the entire year. Director change. How many of you know, if you've worked a job, change in leadership, things don't always happen the way that they were supposed to happen. So literally 2 weeks before school, director calls me, and the new director calls me and says, hey, we're changing that roll up. It's only going to be the spring semester, and it's not going to be scholarship. It's going to be like $5 an hour. I didn't have a way to pay for school, and the bill was due that next week. I didn't have another job. And I literally went home after that conversation, went back to my dorm room because I didn't have a place to go because I didn't have a job. And I just, God, if this is it, then so be it. I don't know what you want me to do here. Things felt uncertain. My God said, just take the next step. And I'm wondering this morning if there's anybody in here where life just feels uncertain. Where even thinking about jumping into a serving opportunity, or thinking about being generous with your finances, or thinking about reaching out and praying for somebody, or connecting with somebody that God's put on your heart, even the thought of that is so far from you because you are in such uncertain territory that you're struggling to make it yourself. The way that we can overcome uncertainty in our life is to just trust the one that called us out of the boat. As I was reading and preparing for this, one person said that Peter actually never stopped walking on water. If he did, he would have instantly sank in and been underwater. As he was going and doubt began to rise, Jesus was still holding him up. All Peter could see was the uncertain situation around him, but Jesus is, I still have you. And we get to that moment where he finally cries out and is like, Jesus, help me, like save me. And Jesus is like, I've had you the entire time. I wouldn't have called you out of the boat, Peter, if I didn't have you. See, I wonder if Peter thought, okay, Jesus, you just told me to come out of the boat because I asked you to. And Jesus is like, I didn't call you out of the boat unless I had you the entire time. Keep trusting that what God is asking you to step into, He will take care of. If I could have everybody stand to your feet. So this is how we're going to wrap it this morning. In a minute, I'm going to actually ask you to do something practical. I love doing this with my students. Like, what are you going to do with what you just heard? So in a moment, I'm going to give you the opportunity to walk across the road over to Western Town and to sign up for something. But before that, I want to ask this question. Is there anybody in this room who feels like they are on uncertain ground right now in this moment? That could be financially. Like you don't know how you're going to pay for your bills. That could be in your marriage. Maybe that family situation seems really unstable right now. You and your spouse have been struggling to get along, or you and your kids have been struggling to get along, and it's come to that point where you don't know the direction it's going to take tomorrow. Or maybe you're just in that point in life, maybe job circumstances are changing, or you're just at that place with God that you're not certain about where he wants you to go next. If that's you, I just want to pray for you, and then we'll close out service. So God, I thank you. God, I thank you for calling us out into the things that you are doing. God, that when we declare you as our Lord and Savior, God, we become a citizen of your kingdom. And as a citizen of your kingdom, God, you are constantly asking us to be involved in the things that you are doing. But God, for some of us, if we're honest, it feels like we're so far away from being able to step into what you're calling us to. God, maybe we're uncertain about our job. Maybe we're uncertain about our finances. Or maybe we're uncertain about our relationships. Or God, maybe we're just uncertain about what you have for us next. So God, I just pray that in this moment, God, that you would speak very clear to us. And God, you would tell us the next step that we are to take. God, I thank you that your direction is always simple. That your invitation isn't filled with a whole bunch of other stuff. It's just simply come. Just simply step out of the boat. Take the next step. God, I pray this morning as we get ready to head out, God, that you would give us the courage to take that next step with you, whatever it looks like. God, I thank you for being faithful in our life. God, even if we feel like things are uncertain, even if there is fear in our life, God, I thank you that you are the place that we can put our hope and our trust. God, we love you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay, quickly before you go, if you need prayer for anything this morning, our ministry team is going to come up and be available to pray with you. So I want to invite you to come be a part of that. If you need prayer for anything, something physically in your body, finances, relationships, direction from God. If that's not you, I'm going to invite you to do a very difficult thing. When you walk out of these doors, do not take a step to the left, but take a step across the street and check in with our ministries here at church and see where you could get plugged in. Our children's ministry is over there, our student ministry, His Word in Action, our outreach ministry, our ushers, our greeters team. Go over there and find a place for you to get plugged in. We love you. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you guys next week.